How many of you have ever heard of the Bible referred to as a page turner? Wait a minute, I'm on the 7th beatitude, I just can't put this down. I've got to know who else is happy, right? What do you mean 99 sheep? There's wolves out there. What are you thinking, right? Spoiler alert, he dies at the end. Just kidding, twist ending. You're never going to believe what happens. Of course, the reason why most of us don't see the scriptures this way is because they are in many ways distanced from us. Historically, culturally, linguistically, in terms of worldview, there's no immediate access. And so very often we encounter passages that we find difficult to accept, if not just inaccessible and foreign. I am very grateful and deeply indebted to the graduate work that I've done in what's called historical critical methods of interpretation. These are basically scientific tools or methods that we use to pull the Bible apart, in essence, to examine the small parts so that we have a far better chance of looking at the whole with far more accuracy. And I am deeply indebted to that because it is that scientific apparatus that helps us to move the scriptures and their meaning from that archaic mentality to our own. And I believe that this justifies, by and large, this scientific approach to studying the Bible that is pervasive throughout academia, that's to say throughout our universities and colleges today. But there's a caution there, because while science can provide accurate interpretations, and they do, they cannot provide meaning. Meaning, our mystical tradition will tell us, can only come through prayer. Prayer over the scriptures and with the scriptures. So I want to present to you an image that was given to me actually by a student of mine after a graduate lecture that I had given on contemplative approaches to Scripture. And she said for her, it seemed like the Scriptures were like a geode. You know, that's one of those very unassuming, dusty, kind of gray-looking stones, right? But if you open it just right and look inside, that dusty, gray, unassuming exterior gives way to an entirely unexpected display of color and vibrancy and crystalline beauty. And I think that encapsulates how many of us approach the Scriptures. And while these scientific methods help us to crack open that dull surface, it is only in prayerful contemplation that we can begin to appreciate the beauty. And if there's something that contemplatives know about, it's appreciating beauty. It's the stuff of contemplative life. So I don't want to get into the technicalities of all of these methods. It would be something like verbal Ambien. You'd be asleep in no time. But I do want to provide you with an image. Imagine you hold in your hands a compass. And no matter which way you turn, the point of that needle always goes north. Now, to the untrained eye, that looks like magic. How does it know? So what I'd like to suggest is one of the most direct ways we can find out how it does that is by taking the compass apart and putting all of those pieces on the table. And now what I have is a wonderful display of all the parts, and seeing how those parts are individually helps me to understand how they function as a whole. And that's very much the way that we approach the Scriptures in academia today. The problem is, by the time graduation rolls around, nobody taught us how to put it back together. See? So what happens is that the Scriptures function very much like this. We take them apart, we look at the little pieces to see how the whole functions. But there's nobody really there to tell us what to do next, how to put it back together so that the Scriptures, once together again, can function something like that compass. In this case, of course, always pointing faithfully to Christ. So what we discover, a little too late, is that dissection, taking the Scriptures apart through these scientific methods, is a beginning, but not the end. And it's been my experience that while the mind is the best tool for doing that kind of dissection, It is only the contemplative heart that can put it back together. And so in my own theological training, again, which I'm incredibly indebted to, I experienced a real disconnect. In the 18 years that I was studying theology, the last bulk of which was all in Scripture, I had about 4 seconds of instruction on the interior life from one professor who walked in and said, "You all better maintain an interior life." That was it. 18 years. And so now in my own work, I am very dedicated to the idea of bringing that contemplative dimension, the right brain, if you will, the heart, into academia, so that students aren't left trying to figure out that holistic approach outside of the course curriculum. And so without forfeiting the insights of more scientific investigations, in my own career, this is what I'm trying to synthesize: mind and heart approaches. In fact, the mission statement at the University of San Francisco, which drew me so intensely when I was interviewing with them, it goes like this: educating hearts and minds to change the world. It is one that overcomes the disconnect between mind and heart that I experienced in my own training. And that's why in my own contemplative courses, be they courses on approaches to Scripture or courses simply in the practice of contemplative spirituality and Christian mystical tradition, that the bedrock of all of my courses is a sustained practice of centering prayer in the classroom, not outside of it. Let me just give you a very brief history of something that Carl had alluded to, which will help explain something of how I arrived at this point, and a little bit about the structure of my courses so that you can kind of get a mental image of what I'm talking about. In the fall of 2007, as Carl had mentioned, I did attend the Garrison, New York retreat, which Father Keating attended, and in which they debuted the Heartfulness series. It hadn't even been in final production yet. It was sort of still the prototypes. Well, throughout the retreat, all of the organizers of the retreat decided that they would have time where we could sign up to have a one-on-one with the leader organizers. So I signed up with everybody, and I took an opportunity to talk with each of them one-on-one and to present some of the ideas that I'd been teaching courses on contemplation, and seeing this Heartfulness series, I felt it could very well be adapted for college classes, and that I would like to experiment with that and work in cooperation. And they were very excited about the idea. So in the course curriculum, I have basically 3 prongs in my approach. First, we talk about theology. And those, of course, all of the readings from my theological component deal with foundations of Christian faith and also prayer and the Christian contemplative life in the sort of trilogy that you are all probably familiar with that Keating has. So we read Keating in relationship to the 2 other prongs. The other prong is Scripture, and the third prong is what I call tradition, in which I provide biographies of the saints throughout Christian history and samplings of their work. Now, the entire course is actually designed not according to Keating's textbook, but according to these 9 series of interviews. And so the kids are sort of reading all throughout the book at different places. And I'm trying to overcome some of the criticisms that I know Contemplative Outreach has been exposed to throughout the years, that this is somehow newfangled or new age or self-hypnosis. So all you need to do is simply look to the mystics and look to the scriptural references, and it becomes abundantly clear that Keating is drawing on a very ancient and time-honored Christian tradition. So I want all of my students to be very in tune with that. We begin each class with centering prayer. And for the first several sessions, a lot of it is about just teaching them what that looks like. So looking at form. Of course, everybody who begins centering prayer thinks they're ADD, right? But that's just the human condition, as Keating would say. So you have to kind of overcome those fears that they have around it. And they're very concerned with form, and they're very concerned with doing it right. I think all of us have been in those stages. But it's, of course, very endearing to watch, because I have yet to encounter any resistance, and this is a very important point, from students in the class who don't want to engage. Every one of them have been enthusiastic about it. So I do want to look in just a moment to what I think it means and why it's important for us to start addressing youthful generation. As the classes continue, we keep developing the length of time we sit in prayer. When I have the good fortune of teaching the course during an intercession or an intensive summer course, we're meeting 5 days a week for 5 hours a day. And particularly in those classes, I try to introduce the prayer 3 times throughout the session. So the beginning, the middle, and the end. So that it doesn't appear to the students as a tag-on, but that they really see that moving from lecture and seminar discussion and reading and conversation and debate into silence has a real impact on how the conversation comes out of that silence. And it's palpable. So, whether it be the scriptural readings or the readings from Thomas Keating or the mystics that we choose, all of them are brought to life in the silence. You don't understand what boredom and dryness is in prayer until you've sat for 20 minutes for the first time at 20 years old, right? It's sort of, oh, I get it, that's what they're talking about, right? So if there's something that I hope you will all take away from this today, it's that contemplation is not, as I hear sometimes in contemplative circles, is not merely for those of us in the second stage of life. And I'm convinced of that. It is something that I hope you will see in the example of the work that I'm doing. After all, think about this as an example. It was the hippie movement of the 1960s, yes? And by the way, USFers were some of the first hippies. We are a stone's throw from Haight-Ashbury, right? So I've got a good tradition to build this on. But here you have these students, these kids in the 1960s, this generation, who was leading the movement of the turn to the East. Now, we could argue somewhat 40, 50 years later that some of that may indeed have been misguided, mistaking, trips on LSD for the real benefit of contemplative practice and how that, looks at mind alteration, things like this. But nevertheless, what I'm interested in you noticing is the impulse that was there in the young, right? There was a thirst for that and a deep desire for that, and I don't think that has at all changed. What I think we're missing now is a youthful social movement to support it, and kids don't know where to turn. They don't know where to turn, but the impulse is there. Very often when kids come into my classes, if we have any discussion about their initial thoughts about what Christianity is, it's not a pretty picture. It's myopic, it's judgmental, it's out of touch with their sexuality, and the list goes on and on and on. It's corrupt. So we've got a lot of baggage to overcome that students from the West in the 60s turning east didn't have to around Buddhism and Hinduism. And there's no movement today trying to turn that interest, that craving, that hunger within the youth toward the West, toward their own traditions. What I want to suggest was lacking in the 1960s movement among the young was mentorship, right? Mentorship. And this is precisely what I'm attempting to provide in these courses on contemplative practice today, a reawakening of the contemplative life for a new generation. Now, of course, I don't have the benefit of a youth movement behind me, but I do have the benefit of a wisdom tradition that stretches back thousands of years, and in this I'm thinking particularly about ancient Israel. Think for a moment about the way we learn about education itself within the Scriptures. And I'm borrowing here from a theologian, Walter Brueggemann, who's a Christian scholar who studies Old Testament. And he has this real brilliant insight about the process of education that we learn within the biblical canon, within the biblical texts themselves. He says, most of us grew up with a catechism where the adults ask you questions and you, the children, have to provide the answer. He says, but look back to ancient Israel. What the adults of Israel did was to invite children into a sense of wonder, into a sense of mystery and awe and ritual and the beauty of their history and tradition, so that it was the children who would ask, why is this night different than all other nights? Why do we eat bitter herbs tonight? It's the children asking, it's the youth asking, and the adults in their place of authority, in their place of wisdom gleaned over the years, that we can respond with some credibility. So in a similar way, I try to invite students into that sense of evoking wonder and awe. One of the general practices that I have in my classes on contemplative prayer is to take the students up to Marin. I live just in Fairfax, just north of San Francisco, and we have more trails than you could ever hike in a lifetime, with some of the most beautiful scenery, I think, in this country. And one day I asked a student who was a senior, a student I had actually been mentoring because he took my class, he had been a fundamentalist Christian, took my class, and left his community, but never anticipated the isolation he would feel, because he was very much abandoned for his now crazy liberal ideas. And I asked him, I said, Robert, have you ever been over the Golden Gate Bridge? He was a senior. No. I said, how is that possible? There is an entire world waiting for you, just 20 minutes over that bridge. So I made it a mission that whenever I teach these contemplative courses, we take the kids out on a hike, I take them up into the mountains, and we spend a day in silence. And I teach them various other forms of meditation, loving kindness, walking meditations, eating meditations, focus meditations, getting them to connect with Scripture, because what I'm finding is one of the biggest problems, not only with the youth today, but all of us, is disconnect. It's disconnect, to get them to unplug and to connect. And so I often tie all of that in with these contemplative courses as a way of evoking the sense of wonder and awe and of beauty. So I'm going to read for a moment, because it's more succinct for me to do so, what sort of is at the basis of my contemplative pedagogy, what underlies my approach to teaching. Contemplative education provides a mentored exploration of the interior life that is both intellectually sound and personally authentic to each student. It has as its aim an awakening of the student to a deeper realization of themselves as infinitely beloved of God, and thus encourages neither social conformity nor radical individualism, but rather the courage to accept the reality of their unique identity as nothing less than another Christ in the world, or what our tradition would call altare Christi, other Christs. A couple of metaphors to help convey some of that approach. Who's familiar with the film Young Frankenstein? Yes, of course. So remember he meets Igor, and I'm sorry, it's Frankenstein, right? So he meets Igor. So it's Gene Wilder, and he comes into the to see Frankenstein, and Igor is sort of walking down this little stairway with a cane, and he says, walk this way, and he hands the cane to Gene Wilder, who he expects, to then come down the stairs in exactly the same way. And of course, the absurdity is in the literalism, and there is Gene Wilder sort of following after him in this ridiculous posture. This is the difference between mimicking Christ and following Christ. And what I try to impress upon the students is that following Christ is not just a conformity to something outside of yourself, but we look to that pointer within and ask, in that pure light of Christ in the world, how is the beauty of that light refracted in your own gifts, in your own personality, in your own talents? And of course, humility is not the kind of false humility that most of us have been brought up with. Humility is seeing the truth and admitting it. That means if you're not too good at something, you have the courage to say it. But if you are good at something, then you have to follow it, because that is how Christ is refracting his light in you. If you're red, then be the brightest red you can be. And if you're blue, be the best blue you can be. Each of us partaking in that one light that is Christ in the world. So that our uniqueness becomes the specific way in which each of us do what Christ did, to become the presence and the love of God in the world. And the universal calling for all of us is a calling to love, and each of us must respond by being most uniquely who we are. That's what we're called to. And that's what the silence helps to open us up to look at. It's what the generation of 20-something-year-olds is interested in. Who am I in the world? And what do I do about that? So I want to suggest that higher education must stop gearing students to be merely productive members of society. And so I try to impress upon them that to teach contemplation is among the most radically countercultural activities that they can engage in because it values being over doing. It draws our identity from being rather than simply doing. And here I find a very unexpected link between the old and the young in our society, because both are under tremendous pressure by our societal obsession with productivity. The problem with our culture's response to the youth is mirrored in our culture's neglect of the elderly. We are measured by productivity, and so young people who don't produce are lazy, and old people who can't produce are worthless. How do we encourage in our students pursual of that which is beautiful? Not just that which is productive, that which is meaningful. Thomas Merton has some beautiful works on the meaning of dignified work, fulfilling work that comes out of my passion, comes out of the very core of who I am. And so I want to suggest that both generations, the old and the young, need to resist this lie at all costs. And so if we want to see young contemplatives, then I suggest we need to find ways to mentor them. We learn to be by being among. The biblical approach to education that I had just discussed insists that the aged members of society have the wisdom so that so many of our younger seekers can find something in that. If we simply accept that the contemplative life begins at midlife, then where will our next generation of elders come from? Who will be there to guide us? Because, you see, we take someone like Father Keating. Father Keating has not grown old. He's grown revered. He's grown enlightened because he began this as a young man. And that growing revered, growing enlightened should serve as a model in the potential of all of us. How is it that we collectively begin to mentor the young? My dream would be 2 to 3 years from now to have 50 kids from my university here. And I wonder if we can make that happen. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you. And this relationship between youthfulness and age is something also that we find in the Scriptures, surprisingly enough. The Scriptures themselves, while revered for being ancient, are in fact forever youthful. The Bible, as old as it is, will always be young because it captures a time when the church was in its youth, vibrant and elastic and energetic. We've now grown to be an older church, have been hallowed by some 2,000 years of wisdom and experience, which has tempered maybe our impetuous naivete that was so present in the early church, but which has also weighed us down and dampened our spirits with scandals and the sins over the course of millennia. And yet it is this very youthful, this very energetic and unyielding optimism of those early Gospels that must forever call us from our complacency and from our accommodation to a culture that has grown tired of being challenged by such youthful passion as we find in the Gospel accounts of Jesus' own life and teaching. So I want to suggest that with a bit of mentoring in their optimism, in their creativity, in their energy, we can reclaim the countercultural and yet radical youthfulness of the Gospels. If they are given an opportunity, if our students are given an opportunity to see how radical the Christian contemplative life really is, how radical the gospel really is. And so, pulling that all together, I would like to just end with a story about something quite interesting and unassuming or unexpected happened just this past summer. I was teaching my course on Heartfulness. And there was a young woman in that course who I found to be very attentive and very present in class. You know the difference between students who are present and those who are wandering. It's a skill you develop rather quickly. And she was very present in class, which is why I was somewhat disturbed when about midway through I noticed a pattern, that there had been some papers that hadn't been turned in, and this surprised me. So I began to worry a bit, thinking perhaps something was wrong. Students sometimes get depressed. Maybe they're distracted or overworked. So I asked if we could meet in the cafeteria and have a conversation, to which she agreed. Well, in the course of this conversation, she took the risk of being totally honest with me. She said, "You're right, Professor, I haven't done the papers." And I said, "Well, what is that about?" And she said, "You know, you were talking about following our passions in class, and my passion is music. And I spend all my time writing music." So I thought for a while, and I thought, am I going to risk this? And I did. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what. You've got 3 papers missing. I'll forego 2 of them. If you write a piece of music for my class and sing it for us that encapsulates what this class means to you and what this contemplative journey looks like for you. Right? And she agreed. I gave her a due date, and she came in, and she sang the song. Now, I'm happy to tell you that she agreed to be here today and to present this song to all of you. So if I could ask Haley Zerker to please come forward for us. The handouts that I gave to you before this began has the words of that song. I think you will find it profoundly beautiful and haunting. And what I've asked Haley to do is to sing the song twice. It's somewhat of a beautiful chant. And I'll ask you to just, if you'd like to follow the words, you may. If not, you have them for later. But I would like to end on this note by sort of bringing us into a place of quiet and allowing the beauty of this song that I found so profoundly moving, as did my entire class, just to allow this to wash over you. So I introduce to you Haley Zerker.
Deep, deep are the lonely ones, far away and far from home. Deep, deep are the lonely ones, far away from home. Pray now to our Father's Son, far away from home. Pray now to our Father's Son, far away from home. Take the highest road inward to the land of gold. Take the highest road inward to the soul. Take the highest road inward to the soul. Take the highest road inward to the soul. Here come the lonely ones, closer now, nearer now. Here come the lonely ones, closer to home. Here come the lonely ones, closer to home. Deep, deep are the lonely ones, far away and far from home. Deep, deep are the lonely ones, far away from home. Pray now to our Father's Son, far away from home. Pray now to our Father's Son, far away from home. Take the highest road inward to the land of gold. Take the highest road inward to the soul. Take the highest road inward to the soul. Take the highest road inward to the soul. Here come the lonely ones, closer now, nearer now. Here come the lonely ones, closer to home.